as I'm recording this, the DA is currently in court challenging the constitutionality of the new Employment Equity Amendment Act, which first I thought was the Employment Equity Act, but there's been amendments made to the Act of 99 or in the 90s, and the amendment was made like in 2023, and the implementation is like now since like the 14th of April. It was supposed to be the 1st of January, but the implementation is now coming into effect this month, and DA has rushed to court once again against their GNU partners. I tried to read up a little bit and I tried to figure out what the actual issue is, but I realized there's many issues with the Employment Equity Act, even the Employment Equity Amendment Act, that no one's talking about. So that's what this video is about today. Welcome to the On the Contrary podcast. I'm Emilio Tobias, and thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. Drop a comment below, because there's definitely going to be some stuff that I'm talking about that I don't fully understand. This is not a podcast about me showing you how well I understand stuff. It's a podcast about discussing. And if you see gaps in my understanding, please drop me a comment. Let's speak over there. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the On the Contrary podcast.
Am I allowed to swear there?
In Sweden.
Yeah, I know we said let's not blame the government.
It's just sad when we start them becoming indoctrinated.
Your view on me.
All right, the DA, the DA is in court over employment equity things, and employment equity has been a big conversation in the past year or so. Especially, I was gonna do a video on Sauls, who's been hounding the different heads of agencies and departments about the implementation of the Employment Equity Act and how that translates to the actual numbers. So their targets, and are these different people meeting the targets? Now, if we start there with Sauls, and my comparison would have been how Sauls interrogates and holds people accountable compared to the much younger, less experienced Liam Jacobs. He'll get there. Sauls is also like a actual pastor, and he's a very good orator, narrator, articulator of words. Broken English here and there, but obviously your ability to master English grammar has no bearing on your intelligence. We know this. So he was holding people to account, and the questions he was asking was not giving his view on what the employment equity should be, and was not even an endorsement of the Employment Equity Act in its current form. But I think everyone agrees with it in principle. Most people agree with what the Employment Act seeks to achieve in principle. But the issue that he was highlighting was that no one is implementing the Employment Equity Act the way it should be. The only beneficiary of the Employment Equity Act seems to have been Black Africans. And he's pointing out that other designated groups, which are groups that have been determined to be previously disadvantaged and in need of favorable conditions to fast track the removal from being previously disadvantaged. So he was showing that colored and Indian people are so badly affected by the implementation of the Employment Equity Act, even though he was not exactly saying that he was agreeing with what the numbers should be in terms of what the target should be, but in fact just holding them accountable that even with the targets that has been solely set by ANC, they're not meeting those quotas. And you find examples where there's no Indian or colored representation, and then there's even more of in some organizations, there's more foreigners working in positions than colored and Indian people. You'll find even in some cases that black women were overlooked in favor of foreign nationals, which according to the Act is not allowed under those circumstances. So that was that debate and that argument. And we'll even remember Caitlin McKenzie got into trouble for saying, yo man, I'm just doing what the Employment Equity Act wants me to do, which has not been set by the PA or Caitlin McKenzie, but been set by the ANC. I'm just doing what the laws and regulations say I should do, because in some places or some industries, there is now an over representation of black Africans. Cool. I have not given my views yet. Nah. I have not given my views yet. Cool. So now, DA is in court right now. DA is in court right now talking about there's been an amendment. There's been an amendment act signed into law in 2023. And here are what I could gather what DA's issue is with these. So some of the changes include the fact that the minister can, at his whim or at his discretion, set what these targets, these employment equity targets are. He can decide in his office or in his capacity as minister, however he seems or to his own discretion, what the target should be year on year. And not only that, the targets will be different across different sectors, construction sector, financial sector, etc., etc. Now, that's one issue. The other issue that DA is saying is that the new act says that if you don't comply, and there is a part where it says you do have opportunity to explain why you are unable to meet these targets. But if you don't comply, you can be punished with jail time or up to 10% of your annual turnover. Turnover is revenue, not profit, which is a bit worse. 10% of your annual turnover. Ne? That's the issue. So they're arguing that whoever's the minister at the time can then just arbitrarily set targets that have nothing to do with anything, and in that manner it can be used as a tool to bully private businesses or as a tool to punish people for their own things, get revenge on whatever level. So they're arguing that, like, yo man, we can't just leave ministers to do what they want in good faith. It's a political system. People are going to push their politics this way, that way, or the other. So we cannot leave it up to a minister to decide those things. And I get what they're saying and where they're coming from. I wonder now if about what PA or Caitlin McKenzie would say about what they're doing. Because Caitlin has been openly critical of the things that he would be critical of. He was critical of bailable, was critical of NHI, but he doesn't necessarily, he speaks out his differences but doesn't necessarily do anything about it. I doubt he'll be sitting next to them in court, and I think he does agree with them doing this. So would Gayton jump on board? I don't think he would, but I think he might express out loud that the current state of the Employment Equity Act, with its amendment, is not what we should be doing. Now, you'll check, it's so difficult to find these targets. I even had to ask Grok. I had to ask Elon Musk's grok, like, yo, my dog, where are these targets and how do we find them? So I found them, or at least I found the targets for 3 of the sectors, and what the targets are for this financial year. Ne? But there's issues with this thing that no one talks about. Is I accept the principle of the Employment Equity Act. The implementation is another story, which we can agree has not been even implemented the way it was intended or the way it was written. So my question to those people who maybe disagree with this thing fully, is it the way it was implemented, or is it on a principle level, on a base level, that you disagree with the Employment Equity Act? So that's an interesting conversation. Do you agree with the principle of it, but disagree with how ANC has dealt with it? Same like with BEE. Do we agree with the principle of BEE, or do we agree with the principle of it, or do we disagree with the implementation, so to speak? BEE, employment equity. So yeah. Now the main focus of this video for me is to speak about the things that I think is wrong with the Employment Equity Act that no one is really talking about. So I managed to find some of these targets according to Grok. So the EAP, I don't know what that is. They probably said it earlier. The EAP-based targets are derived from the national EAP. The national EAP, well, it's probably the population, whatever, is approximately 79.2% Africans, 8.9% Coloreds, 2.5% Indians, and 8.9% whites. Persons with disabilities are 2% across all groups. So I'm guessing these are population stats, ne? And that is should or can be like the basis of the targets for employment equity that they've now set for this year. And remember, now the minister can set these targets, and they can be different and be variable from one another based on the sector. And then sometimes it's also like broken down into top management, senior management, and top management and senior management. Cool, there we go. Here's a target for financial and insurance activities sector. If I have time, I'll put it here. So, for top management in the financial insurance sector, it says for African males 35%, African females 25%, colored males 4, colored females 5, Indian male 3, Indian female 2%, white female 15%, white male 15%, white female 10%, and then persons with disability 2% across all groups. Now, the first issue that I find, even in this first segment, explain this to me. Why do the targets add up to 100%? I'll explain my question. Because making a target add up to 100% is setting yourself up for failure, or setting up the business community for failure. No one's talking about this. So please explain this to me. I don't know if they're going to mention this in the court by the DA. So it's male and females, including male and female split, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If the targets for these 8 groups are at 100%, that means it's highly unlikely that everyone will hit target. It's highly, highly unlikely. And one person can throw off everything. Here's what I'm saying. If these numbers added up to 80%, then you could enforce the stuff. Because look now, in some organizations, if you're saying top management are like heads of department. These aren't senior managers. This is CFO, CEO, and a COO. Top management mostly has that. Everyone has like a degree of different ones, whether it's HR, whether it's marketing, whether it's legal, those different things. Now, how many people do you need to have in your organization to be able to have 4% colored female, 3% Indian male? It's not possible. But if that adds up to 80%, then you have leeway. Now, man, these things are really impossible to hit, because one Indian person leaves, you're out of target, you go to jail. At least there needs to be a buffer to say the target might be 35% for African males. But if you hit 30, it's acceptable. Or definitely you need to hit 35, and that might go up to 50. That still allows you a give and take for the other groups that are in there. Because now, if you have an organization that already has a lot of white people, per se, you probably can't fire white people to bring in other people. Yes, you can decide maybe when this guy retires or when this guy resigns, I'll replace him with an Indian male or a black female, whatever the case may be. But setting the targets at 100%, or the targets adding up to 100%, leaves absolutely no room for slight deviations, which would happen naturally because it's the real world. The world is not mathematical. The world is real. You're never going to hit those targets exactly. And now they might just decide, no, bruh, you're going to jail for this year. So that's weird, which begs the question, and it's difficult to have this conversation when AfriForum and them are also coming with their bad faith arguments. But setting the targets like that, for me, tells me that what you claim your goal is not what you are trying to achieve. Really. So I don't know if anyone understands what I mean, that the targets should not add up to 100%. You do need at least 5% variation, 10% variation. I don't know if somewhere in this thing it explains, it would explain how far you can deviate from that. Because look now, let's say my target for African males is 35%, but I hit 30. Then my target for colored female is 3%, then I hit 0. They're going to say I did worse in employing black people than I did with colored women, because colored women is a 3% variation to 0. Now if I hit 30% black and the target's 35, okay, I think I've made my point. Tell me if I'm stupid for raising that point. Then another issue with employment equity is that it is, so people argue that this thing is making, Dylan Zilla speak, that this thing is making us go to an apartheid system of identifying people by race. But we have to identify people by race because that's how they were discriminated against. So it's not enforcing racial stereotypes, but redressing the things that were implemented based on race back then. But the issue with these numbers, especially with this EAP, which I'm guessing is the national population stats for South Africa. People in South Africa are not dispersed evenly and unilaterally in the country. Because check now, KZN and Western Cape are good examples of population statistics that kind of don't match with the national statistics. Indian people are concentrated in KZN. Indian people do not make up, and the Indian targets are normally 2%, 3%. If you look at the others, 2.5%, 3.5%. Those aren't the numbers in KZN for Indian people. So you cannot use national population statistics to employ Indian people in KZN, because that's going to lead to a higher unemployment rate in the Indian community. And the Indian community in what's in them, which is a thing we don't see much of in the rest of South Africa, is that there's a lot of Indian townships and there's a lot of poverty in the Indian community in KZN. We might not see that so much in Gauteng or even Western Cape or even other parts of South Africa where you don't really find a lot of Indian people. But the rest of us who don't live in KZN have a fallacy that Indian people are doing well, just because we only know Indian people that are doing well. So now you can't use national population statistics to employ people in KZN. You need to use KZN statistics for that. Western Cape, everywhere in South Africa except Western Cape and maybe the Northern Cape, black people are the majority population in that province. Now, the issue is, in Western Cape, where colored people are the majority population, which white people don't seem to understand and black people don't seem to understand, is that you cannot have majority of your workforce being black or white, because this is the two sides of the thing, but the biggest population is colored people. That is strange. That is strange. So now you can't employ people with the employment equity targets of national employment equity targets of national in the Western Cape, because Western Cape population does not look like the national population. Now, the way maths works now is that even if you decide now to break down the provinces, you break down the provinces and let targets be set for each province, each industry, however you want. When you aggregate those stuff, it will aggregate to what the national numbers is, and then your targets at national, and you're reporting to Cyril or reporting to the president, will still meet what it's supposed to. But now, setting a national blanket like this here is creating widespread gaps in colored communities and Indian communities in KZN, where gangsterism is growing. I think precisely because of this Employment Equity Act. It's affecting colored people badly in Western Cape and it's affecting Indian people badly in KZN. That's another issue. Then, so that one seems to be targeted at black people, and it might be easy to be offended or upset with that realization, because now, if you look at the backlash homie got, Kaiten, I call everyone homie. Kaiten is not my homie. The backlash that Kaiten got when he said black males and black females need not apply. The other issue is, no one's talking about, is that tribalism is also a driver of unfair discrimination in hiring practices. Ne? Because I've spoken about it in a previous video. Some provinces are more diverse than others. And we even just look at black African diversity and the different cultural groups. And it's been known that if you are Xhosa, you are more likely to hire Xhosa people. Not because you hate anyone else, but you're more likely to look after closer people. That might be subconscious, it might be very conscious. If you are petty, you're more likely to hire petty people. Just an example. And you find this in workplaces. If the boss is one thing, the rest of the people that they hired might be 60% from that specific cultural or traditional group. So my suggestion, my third issue with this thing is that maybe let's move away from race a little bit and then see these different groups as cultural groups. So we break everyone down. We break everyone down. I don't know if we split colored people into two groups or we keep them one group, even though the colored group is probably the most diverse ethnically. But let's say we split up the Black African group and have targets for that as well. And they should be separate from they should be different from province to province. Because I don't think you find a lot of Tsonga people in Eastern Cape. So there doesn't have to be a 20% Tsonga representation in the Eastern Cape, where there might be a 20-30% Tsonga representation in Mpumalanga, for example. I say we break it down like that. And we break it down even further. Break it down. We don't just say white male and white female. We say Afrikaner male, Afrikaner female. Then we say, what do we say, English or other white. We break it down like that and have targets according to that. I think it will blow over much easier, and it will address what the Employment Equity Act was meant to address in the first place. Let's split up everyone. Indian people, I don't know if you want to be one group. We can maybe split it into Indian people who are culturally Muslim, Indian people who are culturally Hindu, Tamil, all those things. And we're splitting them not by religion, but by culture, because there might be discrimination amongst those groups also. You find Hindu guys will never hire a Muslim guy or vice versa. I don't know this, but that might also be a thing. So that's number 3 of the things that I think we should look at. Now that we're showing interest in the stuff, maybe it will let us know that, hey, maybe we must do the public comments when these things come out for public comment, because I do think public comments do make it into the public and do get analyzed by Parliament before when it goes through Parliament processes. And I think these 3 are very good suggestions. Here they are again. Number 1, the target should not add up to 100% to allow for some natural deviation within 5% of what the target is, or whatever the case might be. Then cool. They should not add up to 100%. Number 2, don't use national population stats. Use provincial population stats. And then lastly, let's maybe not use racial division, but rather traditional or cultural division. And that maybe is more difficult to identify, because you can identify as anything you want and just change the forms however you want it to. But I think it might be a better system than what's currently in place. Caveat. Do you know that back in apartheid, depending on the opportunities, job opportunities and housing opportunities, people did go into, I don't know if it is home affairs or whatever, and were able to make applications to change their race. And it did happen. There were white people that applied to be colored. There were colored people that applied to be white. There were colored people that applied to be black. Colored people that applied to be Indian. There were Indian people that applied to be colored. And there were black people that did apply to be colored. And there were colored people that applied to be black. And normally that was because when apartheid set budgets for housing and the employment equity that they had set for that time, they were set by provinces, and depending on where you were, it might have been more convenient to be colored or more convenient to be black. That's all for today, and I'm out of breath. But That's an interesting conversation, and I wish to touch on it one day. And I'm going to look it up more, and I'm going to get actual stats from back in the day when people used to change their races. But my thing still stands. Let's maybe do employment equity by cultural group, and we split everyone. Afrikaners from English-speaking white people, Muslim culturally, from Hindu culturally, Indian groups, colored people. Colored people are the only ones who are like really everywhere. And then we split Tsonga from Zulu from this. Maybe it's Ndebele, Sutu, and then the other ones. I don't know if they group Tsonga, Venda, and Changan. Anyway, my voice is gone. I'm gonna go get water now. But in the meantime, drop a comment. Let me hear what you think. And then don't forget to subscribe to On the Contrary with Emilio Tobias. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the On the Contrary podcast.
Am I allowed to swear here?
In Sweden,
Yeah, I know we said let's not blame the government.
it's just sad when we start them becoming indoctrinated. Your view on me.